Welcome to Sifting for Soul. In this episode, I'm going to walk you through my photo editing workflow using Lightroom Mobile on the iPad. I previously did a tutorial using my laptop, but if you watch that tutorial, I have lots of things connected to my MacBook Pro because it's USB-C and I've got dongles and all sorts of things that make it a little bit frustrating to use, kind of a lot to carry around. It's funny because until there was a better way, I was totally willing to deal with that frustration, but now that there's a better way, I'm super excited about using it on my iPad. So I actually use my iPad for probably 90% of my workflow now, and it's really sped things up quite a bit. And so I'm going to walk you through my workflow using some of the images that I did in the previous vlog. If you haven't, you should just go ahead and subscribe. I mentioned this before, I don't know what your budget is, but it's free $99. And so everybody should be able to afford free $99. I mean, I don't want to denigrate anyone. Like, if you feel like you can't afford free $99, then I don't think you're good at getting jokes, because free $99 doesn't cost you anything. In either case, you should just subscribe. It's fun, it's interesting, and it'll encourage me to keep doing this instead of the other things I used to do, which you don't really want to know about. Nobody wants me doing those things, certainly not in public. So, not a threat or anything, but you should subscribe. And as always, let's get it. Alright, so my workflow on the iPad. First, some life stuff. So I want to acknowledge that there's a ton of stuff happening in my life. And in fact, that's always true because that's just how life is. There's always a ton of stuff happening. A lot of things sort of beyond my control, a lot of things within my control, but I'm coping. And one of the things that I do to cope is I edit photos. I find it very soothing. I find it sort of zen, and in the end, I get really cool images out of it. So sometimes it's just, there's a ton of photos that I never even show the rest of the world. They're really just sort of for me. I think of photography as a way for my soul to see itself expressed, which is somewhat ironic given that the scientist in me doesn't even believe in this thing that we call a soul, but I lack better terms to describe that. So, I find it very therapeutic, and hopefully these tips will help you get started doing whatever kind of editing or whatever thing that you find therapeutic. As you know, the whole purpose of this channel is evolving and becoming a better human, and this is part of how I evolve and become a better human. So I mentioned that there was some life stuff going on, so I want to be honest and real about some of that life stuff. I'm taking a little breather from work, and so dealing with some mental health stuff not very effectively. Everyone, I think, deals with a version of mental health stuff. I have a number of things that I deal with, and this is one of the strategies for dealing with that. And so because I've been ineffective, I haven't been prioritizing my mental health, and so I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I can step away and prioritize my mental health and remove the toxicity from my life. Including removing toxicity in my relationships. Sometimes I'm the toxicity in my own relationships and I need to remove me. Other times, not so much. But the point of it is to continue to evolve, to continue getting better. And so all of that on the table, let's actually get into some editing, and let's understand how to do some editing in Lightroom Mobile and get some of the therapeutic benefit out of it, and also end up with a cool creative image out.
The first challenge is really, how do you get the images from the camera into the iPad? I've tried a variety of dongles for when I'm just out in the field somewhere. Honestly, my preferred method is just to copy the images into my main collection on my laptop and then have that sync with Creative Cloud and then pull them down. But in the interest of focusing on how I think most people do it, and if you figure out a dongle that will work for you, and then just slide your card into the dongle. Even with this, there's a few caveats to it. It's like the first time getting the dongle to work right can be a challenge, like especially if you get like third-party ones. The aftermarket ones are kind of a little bit janky, and so figuring out like, okay, is it the dongle that's janky? Is the card not seated properly? So after playing with it for a bit, trying to get it to work, you might get it to work, and then you may not see all your images. It depends on what kind of camera you have. With Sony, you have to do a few extra settings on the Sony. I'm not going to cover that here. I had several images on this card, but I'm only seeing one of the images, and that's because there's a weird quirk with iOS where the name of the file, the name of the image file, has to be exactly 8 characters long. And so I have the card in my laptop now, and when I look, this is the image that I see, and this file is exactly 8 characters long, but I don't see the other files that I renamed specifically so that I would know what they are. And so in order to get that to work, I'm going to have to go through and change these files, change their names so they're exactly 8 characters long. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And there's also a quirk where iOS doesn't recognize all the file types that cameras can record. So even though Canon, fortunately by default, I hadn't actually noticed this until trying to prep this video, that there was that 8 character thing, because by default Canon file names are all 8 characters for both, and it only applies to the actual file name, not including the file extension. And so it's true for both RAW files and JPEGs. But if you make the file name 8 characters, both the RAW files and the JPEGs are available if your format is CR2. If your format is not CR2, if you have like a Canon M50, then your format's going to be CR3, and those files won't show up as importable in iOS. And so that's a little bit frustrating. But once you rename them, then so basically don't change the name if you have a Canon camera. If you don't change the name, it'll be 8 characters long, and then you can just pop it into your dongle and then select each file, and then you can import it. I'm going to go ahead and import it into iTunes, or excuse me, import it into iPhoto, and then I'm going to select delete after it finishes importing, because I don't really need a copy of these files to be resident on the cards anymore. And now I have the files in here. Again, this is not the usual way I do this. I will do this if I have the files only on my card and I'm on an airplane where I don't have internet connection. But otherwise, my preference is to just add it to my laptop, the library that's on my laptop, and then to pull it down, because I automatically get a backup of that as well. And I just prefer that method. But I suspect most people will be using the method where they import it directly into their iPad, assuming you have a dongle that's not super annoying. The first dongle I tried was like the iFlash dongle, and I think that one actually requires software. But the nice thing about it is I can plug it into either my computer with USB-C or into my iPad, and so it should be multifunction.
So I've gone into recently added, and at the top of recently added, I see 3 photos, not 4 photos, because one of the photos I already had in this library, so it doesn't appear there. So not a surprise at all. So we click on recently added, and I will see these are sort of my 3 photos to choose from. And so we'll pick one that I promised you some photos from the last vlog, so I'll go ahead and work on one of these. So the very first thing that I do when I come into this environment, notice it's quite different from the other environment. There's no library, there's no develop, there's no modules as those things go. You basically just jump right into the catalog. So I'm into recently added, and the very first thing that I'll do is get down here on the bottom where I have information, where the eye is on the bottom right. I click on that with my pencil, and then I look to get some of the details of this image. I know this was shot with my DJI drone, And so I can see that I can see the shutter speed at 1/470th of a second, aperture of f2.2, and then ISO 100, and this is a JPEG. The original image had a really long name, but I've shortened the name so that I would be able to import it into Lightroom. And I can also add some keywords to it. It already has some keywords from when it was in the library. I can also go here and add some comments to it for shared albums. And I can come up here to the star. The star is the one that I care about because I'm going to flick up with my pencil so that it checks it and flags it, as you see here on the bottom right in the center. Cool. So now that I have it picked, so that allows me to know when I look in other environments and filter for that. Now that I have it picked, I can go up here and start my workflow. I usually start at the top with the adjustments, and sometimes I'll click auto and see what that does, but rarely. I generally like to do my own thing. So let's just click auto and see what it does to the image. That's okay. It's a little bright for my taste. The day was actually, you can see all the clouds in the sky, and there was a storm coming. So the day was quite different than that. So I'm going to click at the top the undo auto settings, and then I'm going to work my way through the settings that I want to apply to this image. One of the things that you'll also notice is I don't have a virtual copy. And so I normally do all my changes in the desktop version of Lightroom in a virtual copy, whereas this, I'm operating directly on the file itself. But it is Lightroom, so I can always get back to the original if I want to, and I can also export the original if I want to keep a copy of it. And so if I wanted to do that workflow, I click on the share options, and then down here at the bottom there's export original. And you can actually do the export of the original even after you've done all your changes. So it's not quite as nice on space as a virtual copy because it is actually another copy of the data, not just a pointer. But if you're worried about being able to get back to your changes, or to get back to the original, you can start all over again with that. But on the desktop Lightroom, you can also undo each level of your change. So you have multiple options, but it's a little bit different workflow, and that will take some getting used to. So the very first thing that I do is that even though I started with the adjustments on the right, then I go to the bottom because these things I always do. So I'll click remove chromatic aberration and then enable lens corrections. And then I close optics, and then I expand geometry. And in geometry, my horizon looks fairly straight, but let's just give it an auto and see what that does. Clicking auto, and it straightened it the rest of the way for me, so that looks pretty good. You can also constrain the crop if you know you're going to be doing a lot of adjustments. I generally don't constrain the crop because if I'm going to lose my corners, then I'll take it into Photoshop and do it because I'm stingy with my pixels. I want them all. So I did optics and geometry, and then I jump up to the top and go into light. And then just like in classic Lightroom, I almost always kill my highlights and recover some of the detail in the sky. I almost always boost my shadows a little bit. Now, because this is shot with a drone, I'm going to boost a lot less than I normally do because the drone will give me softer images. So the thing that I focus on will be fairly sharp, but the rest of the detail will be fairly soft. And you can see that just looking at this image, especially compared to something that's a lot higher megapixel. So the camera on here is a 12 megapixel camera. This is the Mavic Pro, the original one. And so it's a 12 megapixel camera, whereas my 5DSR is, of course, 50 megapixels. So that's more than 4 times the resolution. And so with that, we expect to see softness around in the rocks. You see a bit of softness around here as well. You see some noise in the water, some noise in the sky. So all of that's to be expected. This image isn't designed to be zoomed in on or looked at up close. It's really sort of a far away scanning of the entire area. It's also noteworthy that even though my 5DSR is a higher resolution, I could never get this image with it because I can't fly. I wanted to tell you that sooner, but I didn't want to further disappoint you. As you've heard, there's been some other challenges in my life, so I'm a little cognizant of disappointing people. So, totally kidding. Not kidding. I actually can't fly. But anyway, Cool. So I do see some softness. So I'm going to be a little bit more gentle on my changes. And so I'll dial back the shadows to about 8. I'm comfortable with the highlights. I think that's okay. I do want to give it a bit of contrast, and I'm comfortable with the exposure settings. I really like this boat out here and how the water is coming forward off the boat. So I think that's all great. So I'm going to go ahead and close light, and then I'm going to open color. Now with color, I generally because I'm often editing night shots, I generally make them cooler. I'm reasonably okay with the color here. I could see an argument for making it a little warmer, although that's inconsistent with how the day felt. So I would reset that, just hitting the undo bar up top. And then I would give it a little bit of magenta though, because there was a bit, like bring out the magentas a bit. And then I'm going to boost my vibrance. I've got that, about 16. I'm going to give it a little bit more saturation, not too much. And that looks pretty good to me. And so I'm going to go ahead and close color, and then open detail. And oops, I skipped effects, so let's do effects first. So let's always boost the clarity a little bit, bring out more of the drama in the sky. And then I like, for this image, I want to give it a little bit of a vignette. Now with this vignette slider, it's pretty cool, because if I dial it down, it gives me a super dark vignette. And if I dial it up, it gives me a super bright vignette. I really want a little bit of dark vignette, because as I said, I want to convey that there's a bit of imminence, a bit of doom coming this way with the storm in the background. And then highlights and grain, I think that's fine. I'm going to leave that alone. And then I'll close my effects. And now I will open detail. Now because this already has some noise in it, I want to add some noise reduction. And I'm okay with that softening some of the sharpness of this. So I'm going to crank up the noise reduction. I'm also going to crank up the color noise reduction. And so that's a little bit more pleasing for me to look at. And then we'll go ahead and get rid of that.
In the interest of keeping these videos short and digestible, we're going to break here from now. And in the next episode, I'll show you how to do local adjustments. And so I'll also give you, I promise, some screensavers. So I'll also make them available shortly. Thank you for watching. If you liked it, feel free to give a thumbs up. Go ahead and subscribe and click the notifications to make sure you get notified when I release the next video. Leave me a comment if something was unclear, or if you want more explanation about anything. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video, and be good to yourself.